I awaken every day, enveloped in a whirlwind of sound, scents, and movements that for centuries have defined the pulse of my veins made of stone and marble. When the first lights of dawn timidly creep over the hills, Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, my cold skin of travertine and tuff begins to warm under the silent gaze of the rising sun. The morning mist hovers thick over the clay rooftops of the insulae, momentarily hiding the contours of the imposing basilicas and temples that honor me, but soon it dissipates, revealing the daily spectacle that gives me life, the awakening of the urbe. In the aristocratic domus carefully arranged in the noble neighborhoods near the Roman Forum, the day begins with a silent, almost ritualistic ceremony. The paterfamilias, the absolute lord of the house and the destinies within it, wakes even before dawn, guided not by the crowing of roosters or the shine of the sun, but by the rigor of discipline that shapes the Roman spirit. Dressed in his white tunic, simple but impeccably clean, he walks through the atrium, where the image of the domestic lares, the protective gods of the family, watches over the house on an altar, carefully adorned with flowers, fruits, and small offerings. There, in a brief yet solemn gesture, the head of the family lights the sacred fire and utters words of protection, praying to the gods for the health, prosperity, and honor of his genes. Meanwhile, in the higher and more populous parts of the city, where the insulae, often unhealthy and fragile residential buildings, pile up as testimonies to the haste and urban chaos, the awakening is noisier and more hurried. The enslaved and freed people who inhabit the lower parts of these buildings, exposed to the humidity and the odors of the city that never ceases, are already up, preparing for yet another day of exhausting work. The acrid smell of burnt oil for lighting mixes with the aroma of stale bread and cereal porridges that compose the modest breakfast of most common citizens. Children awaken to the sound of cartwheels, the cries of street vendors already occupying the streets, and the incessant hammering in the workshops of artisans. My narrow, dimly lit alleys come alive quickly, and it does not take long for crowds to form continuous flows, running from one side to another in search of sustenance, entertainment, or devotion. Amid the hustle and bustle, the matronae stand out, respectable women in toga and stola, accompanied by their slaves, heading to markets or temples to fulfill their religious and social obligations. Their gestures are measured, their words discreet, for Roman dignity is also expressed in the way one occupies the street, with pride and restraint. In contrast, prostitutes, wine sellers, and gamblers already gather at street corners, composing the contradictory and fascinating mosaic of my existence. The Roman Forum, my beating heart, begins to receive its first visitors even before the full rise of the sun. Magistrates and senators, wearing tunics adorned with purple bands denoting their status, discuss the city's directions, while lawyers prepare to defend clients in the day's cases. Stoic philosophers, cloaked in simple garments, gather under the porticos to debate virtue and destiny, ignoring the deafening noise of carts transporting marble, amphorae, and timber along the main roads. All this movement composes an uninterrupted urban symphony, where even silences are laden with meaning, for even in the pause there is the expectation of what is to come. In the houses of the patricians, servants are already preparing the iantaculum, the first meal of the day, consisting of bread, cheese, fruits, and, for the wealthier, small fish and boiled eggs. While men organize their political, military, or economic activities, women supervise household chores, care for the children, and sometimes devote themselves to literature, music, or religious practice. The Roman home, far from being just a private space, is also a reflection of public order, a microcosm that obeys the same logic of discipline, hierarchy, and devotion that governs the city as a whole. But it is not only free citizens who set the rhythm of my awakening. On every corner, in every domus, in every market, the presence of the enslaved is constant and indispensable. They are the ones who light the fires, clean the streets, transport the goods, care for the children, accompany the masters to baths, temples, and arenas. Without their invisible and forced labor, the splendor of my urbe would never have reached the grandeur I proudly display today, and yet few grant them even a glance, for their existence blends with the very gears that move the city. As the sun ascends and the shadows of the temples slowly retreat, my city expands in a millennial choreography, repeated every day with almost ritualistic precision. The streets fill with merchants coming from the most distant provinces, bringing Oriental fabrics, African spices, Egyptian perfumes, and amphorae of wine from Gaul and Hispania. Artisans open the doors of their workshops, displaying vases, statues, sandals, and jewelry that supply everyone from the humblest plebeians to the most demanding nobles. Meanwhile, priests and priestesses prepare for the day's religious ceremonies, for there is never a single moment when my gods are not invoked, celebrated, or feared. The beginning of the day in Rome is not merely a sequence of tasks. It is the daily reaffirmation of a civilization built upon rigor, order, and an unwavering belief in its own eternity. Each citizen, each enslaved person, each magistrate, and each priest, by performing their role knowingly or not, contributes to keeping alive this colossal organism that is me, Rome, the eternal urbi. And thus, as the sun fully dominates the sky, bathing my rooftops, columns, and statues with a golden and relentless light, I begin yet another cycle, knowing that at the end of this day, others will follow, incessantly perpetuating this daily life that, more than the brilliance of military victories or the glory of emperors, is what truly defines me. I am a city that feeds both body and spirit. In my squares, markets, and taverns, food circulates as an invisible thread connecting all social classes, all cultures, and all the eras of my existence. Eating here is not merely a biological necessity, but a social, political, and religious ritual. And though Rome is an empire with borders stretching from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germania, its culinary soul pulses unmistakably between garum and bread. Soon after awakening, when the first tasks of the day are set in motion, my citizens partake in the irontaculum, the frugal morning meal, almost always consisting of a piece of bread dipped in wine, perhaps some dates or dried figs, and, for the more fortunate, a bit of cheese or honey. This meal is quick, modest, and silent, for the true gastronomic pinnacle of Roman life does not occur in the morning, but insinuates itself slowly throughout the day, like the waters of the Tiber that, placidly, curve around my walls. Among the many elements that define my cuisine, bread is the most omnipresent, the true cornerstone of the Roman diet. Baked in domestic ovens or in public bakeries, the pistrina, bread takes on various forms and sizes. The panis quadratus, flat and marked with geometric cuts, the panis militaris, dry and sturdy, destined for soldiers, or the panis candidus, white and soft, reserved for the wealthy. In the narrow streets of the insulae, the aroma of freshly baked bread mixes with the oily vapors of garum, the famous and controversial fermented fish sauce that flavors much of Roman fare. Garum, the ultimate symbol of my cuisine, as loved as it is hated but inevitably present. Produced from fish entrails left to ferment under the sun for weeks or months, then strained to achieve a golden liquid texture, it is used to season meats, vegetables, fruits, breads, and even desserts. From the humblest citizen to the emperor, all know its unmistakable taste, which awakens the palate and stimulates the appetite. Amphorae of garum, coming from specialized factories in southern Hispania or along the Mauritanian coasts, travel thousands of miles to land at the ports of Ostia and from there to the tables of Rome, bearing witness to my incomparable commercial network. The prandium, a second meal, more substantial than the first but still distant from splendor, is consumed at midday. For many workers, artisans, and plebeians, it consists of a simple dish, perhaps some pulse, the thick porridge made of farro or wheat, accompanied by legumes like lentils or chickpeas, and, when possible, a piece of salted meat or dried fish. In the tabernae, small eating houses scattered along public roads, the diversity is greater. One might find cold meat sandwiches, fresh or roasted fruits, and wines of varying quality served in amphorae opened right there before the customers. But it is at dusk, when shadows lengthen over the forum, and the city's hustle begins to transform into a slower and more reflective rhythm, that the gastronomic apex of Rome manifests, the cena, or cena convivialis, the evening banquet. This is the moment of socialization, of status demonstration, of cultural and even philosophical expression. For patricians and the wealthy, the cena takes place in the triclinium, the space reserved exclusively for the banquet, adorned with mosaics depicting mythological scenes and flanked by elegant columns. Guests recline on couches, leaning on the left elbow, while the right arm remains free to guide food to the mouth. The dishes served are as many and varied as imagination and wealth allow. Fresh oysters and mussels, noble game such as wild boar or pheasant, eggs boiled and seasoned with herbs, vegetables dressed with sophisticated sauces, breads accompanied by honey, cheese or exotic fruits, and of course wine, never drunk pure for such a practice would be deemed barbaric, is mixed with water, cooled with snow brought from nearby mountains and flavored with oriental spices. The enslaved, invisible and silent, circulate among the diners, bringing new delicacies, collecting leftovers, refilling cups, and ensuring that nothing is missing to keep the conviviality flowing and pleasurable. Often these dinners stretch late into the night, interspersed with musical performances, poetic recitations, philosophical debates, or comic shows. Excesses are common, and satirists like Horace and Juvenal never tire of criticizing the moral decay hidden beneath the ostentation of aristocratic banquets. Yet, at the same time, these gatherings are fundamental to the construction of the political and social networks that sustain the functioning of my republic, and later my empire. However, not all can afford such opulence. For the vast majority of my inhabitants, plebeians, artisans, small traders, and especially the enslaved, the daily diet is marked by modesty and often scarcity. Pulse, bread, cheap cheese, onions and olives form the base of a diet that, though simple, suffices to provide the energy required for the exhausting daily labors. Wine, though widely consumed, is diluted with water and rarely enriched with spices. Meat is a luxury, reserved for festive occasions or for those who can afford it. And even fresh fish, abundant in the ports, does not reach all tables with the same frequency. Amid this diversity, my squares and markets, such as the Forum Boreum, specialized in cattle trade, or the Macellum, dedicated to the sale of meat and fish, are vibrant stages where food is not only a commodity, but also a spectacle. Vendors shout to announce their offers, customers bargain intensely, children run between the stalls, and the unmistakable aroma of oriental spices, arriving from as far as India or Arabia, lingers in the air, reminding all that Rome is not merely a city, it is the center of a world interconnected by roads, ports, and trade routes that turn the wheel of civilization. Roman food is not merely an act of survival, but a metaphor for my very being, plural, contrasting, contradictory, and above all, resilient. I am a city where the foulest garum and the humblest bread inevitably meet with the most luxurious banquets and the rarest delicacies. And thus, between the pungent aroma of fermented fish and the sweet perfume of wild fruits gathered on the hills of Latium, I continue to nourish my sons and daughters, sustaining the body of this eternal and insatiable urbe that I am. In every fold of fabric that covers the bodies that inhabit me, I carry not only an aesthetic signal, but an indelible mark of identity, of social position, and of the ethos that defines who we are, or who we aspire to be, within this monumental order that I am, Rome. The act of dressing here is not and has never been a neutral gesture. It is a silent pronouncement, a social code that at first glance communicates the place one occupies in the complex hierarchy that structures me. Who has the right to speak, to govern, to bear arms, or simply to be seen and respected? The male citizens, proud of their status, are recognized from afar by a single symbolic garment, the toga. It is neither practical nor comfortable, nor simple to wear or maintain, but precisely for this reason, it is a symbol of status, a walking standard of citizenship. The toga is not meant for the enslaved, nor for foreigners. It is the exclusive privilege of Roman citizens, and among them, the stripes and colors add even more nuance to the silent language of clothing. The toga virilis in immaculate white marks the official entry of the young man into the adult world, a rite of passage that seals his full integration into public life. The toga praetexta, bordered with a purple stripe, is reserved for magistrates in office and patrician children, signaling dignity and protection. But the apex of power and solemnity is found in the toga picta, embroidered and dyed in purple, a rare and precious color extracted from the murex, a Mediterranean mollusk. This is the garment that adorns triumphant generals in their processions, the imperatores, who parade through my streets under acclamation, guiding chariots and displaying the spoils of wars that have extended my domains to the very edges of the known world. Every purple thread is a testimony to the bloodshed, the wealth conquered, and the eternal glory that Rome offers to those who dare to challenge her and win. Yet, far from ceremonies and public functions, most Romans opt for the tunic, a simpler and more practical garment consisting of 2 pieces of fabric stitched along the sides, with openings for the arms and head, and fastened at the waist by a belt, the cingulum. For men it is often made of white wool, although the humbler make do with natural colours or those dyed with cheap pigments, such as ochre or brown. Legionaries and labourers, who depend on freedom of movement, adopt the short tunic, while ordinary citizens prefer lengths that reach down to the knees. Women, in turn, inhabit their own grammar of fabrics and adornments. The stola is the quintessential garment of the matronae, married women of respectable reputation. It is a long tunic, often of linen or fine wool, adorned with fringes and discreet embroidery, covering the body down to the feet, and accompanied by the palla, a cloak that wraps around the shoulders and head when necessary. The way a Roman woman adjusts her palla and chooses her colors and ornaments communicates not only her aesthetic taste, but also her social position, her marital availability, and even her religious inclinations. Courtesans, for instance, distinguish themselves with more provocative clothing, brighter colors, and heavy cosmetics, deliberately challenging the limits of respectability. Thus, it is not merely about garments, but a true silent theater, performed daily in my streets, squares, temples, and markets. Each citizen, man or woman, upon leaving home, dresses as one assuming a role, conscious that Rome watches, judges, and determines, with an implacable gaze, the conformity or deviation from the established norms. Beyond clothing, the Roman body is shaped by the aesthetics and symbols that society values. Female hairstyles, especially among the elites, are true walking sculptures, elaborated with braids, buns, and arrangements that require hours of preparation and the skill of specialized enslaved women, the ornatrices. Fashions change with time, influenced by empresses, popular actresses, and trends arriving from the provinces. During the Julio-Claudian reign, for example, women sport high and complex hairstyles, while under the Flavians and Antonines, a more sober elegance prevails. Jewelry, in turn, is both ornament and investment. Gold necklaces, amber bracelets, rings set with precious stones, ivory earrings, and protective amulets are worn not only to adorn the body, but also to ward off the evil eye, attract good fortune, or assert family wealth. Among the lower classes, bronze and glass offer affordable alternatives, ensuring that even among the humblest, the desire for beauty and protection finds its place. I cannot omit either the footwear, for it defines the way my inhabitants traverse the endless paved roads that weave my urban fabric. The caligae, sandals reinforced with metal nails, are typical of soldiers and legionaries, while the solii, lighter and simpler sandals, fit the feet of citizens in domestic or public environments. Women opt for delicate shoes, often colorful, that complement the harmony of their garments, while the enslaved often walk barefoot, exposing the harshness of their condition. In my vast expanse, where patricians and plebeians, soldiers and senators, enslaved and merchants coexist, clothing is both a common language and an instrument of social differentiation. It draws invisible yet powerful boundaries between those who hold power and those who obey, between those who can vote, speak, or fight, and those who merely serve, silently, the machinery that sustains my empire. But, like every language, garments too can be subverted. It is not rare for citizens to dare dress as soldiers, plebeians to imitate the ostentation of patricians, or foreigners who, by adopting my clothes, aspire to integration or disguise. Fashion, like power, is an object of dispute, of transgression, and of constant negotiation. And I, Rome, observe it all. I allow, I repress, or simply ignore as it suits me, for I know that above any fabric, it is I myself who clothe everyone with my culture, my order, and my eternity. Thus I go on, covered by 1,000 garments, by 1,000 bodies, by 1,000 stories, wrapped in this invisible mantle that unites my sons and daughters and transforms them every day into what they are, Romans. I am made of stone, marble, and clay, but I am also made of spaces where lives intertwine, where they love, negotiate, and conspire. My houses are not merely shelters against the weather or the relentless heat of the Mediterranean summer. They are material manifestations of the social order that defines me, and at the same time, intimate stages where human existence unfolds, day after day, century after century. Within my depths coexist the silent opulence of the patrician domus, the noisy precariousness of the plebeian insulae, and the bucolic placidity of rural villas, composing an architectural symphony that translates in masonry the essence of my civilization. At the heart of my noblest neighborhoods, near the Forum or scattered across the gentle slopes of the Palatine and Esquiline hills, rise the domus, aristocratic residences that not only shelter, but proclaim with their grandeur the status and virtue of their owners. Entry is through the vestibulum, a transitional space between the street and the interior, often adorned with mosaics that invite or warn, such as the famous cave canem, beware of the dog, that discreetly protects domestic intimacy. Crossing this threshold, the visitor enters the atrium, the symbolic heart of the domus where natural light penetrates through the compluvium, a rectangular opening in the roof, and spills onto the impluvium, the basin that collects rainwater, ensuring freshness and humidity for the space. Around the atrium are arranged the cubicula, small rooms used for rest or receiving intimate guests, and the alley, lateral spaces that often display busts of ancestors, preserving the memory of the genes and reinforcing the indissoluble bond between lineage, honor, and property. Further back lies the tablinum, the office of the paterfamilias, from where he manages his business, receives clients, and exhibits records attesting to the respectability and achievements of his family. If the atrium is the space of public representation, the peristyle is the realm of private delight. It is an internal garden, surrounded by elegant columns supporting a covered gallery, opening onto flower beds, fountains, and in some wealthier homes, even small artificial lakes with ornamental fish. There the family gathers in leisure hours, enjoying meals outdoors, listening to music, or simply contemplating the architectural harmony that unites nature and culture in a silent embrace. The triclinia, dining rooms adorned with mosaics and frescoes of mythological themes or idyllic landscapes, are the stage for banquets, where the ritual of eating is elevated to a social and political performance. And in the most reserved parts of the domus hide the culinary, smoky kitchens where the enslaved prepare food, and the latrinae, discreet yet essential, evidencing the sophistication of the hydraulic system running beneath the sidewalks and walls of the city. Yet not all enjoy the silent and orderly luxury of the domus. The vast majority of my inhabitants find shelter in the insulae, multi-story collective buildings made of wood, brick and mortar, often hastily and carelessly built to meet the incessant demand for affordable housing in my overcrowded urbe. The insulae are conglomerates of tiny apartments, with scarce ventilation, poor lighting, and almost always without individual access to running water or proper sanitation. On the lower, more stable and safer levels live those who can pay higher rents, merchants, successful artisans, minor public officials. On the upper floors, however, the poorest crowd together, constantly at risk of fires, as will happen in times to come when entire neighborhoods are devastated under the cold and watchful gaze of Nero and of structural collapse caused by time and neglect. Life in the insulae is marked by spatial promiscuity, incessant noise, and the mixed odors of food, bodies, and sewage that freely runs through the alleys, composing a sensory landscape as dense as it is chaotic. Yet, even in these cramped spaces, pulses the vitality that sustains me. There, children are born, alliances are forged, small daily victories are celebrated, and the hardships of urban existence are endured with stoicism. Far from the city's tumult, scattered across the fields of Latium, the hills of Tuscany, or the fertile plains of Campania, stand the villas, rural residences serving both as retreats for aristocratic leisure and as productive centers that supply my insatiable metropolis. Some, like the grand marine villas of Baiae, or the elite properties on the slopes of Pompeii and Herculaneum, are true palaces, adorned with mosaics of tiny tesserae, frescoes in vibrant colors, and gardens that imitate in miniature the divine order of the cosmos. Others, more modest, are functionally organized around the Villa Rustica, spaces dedicated to agricultural production with stables, barns, and lodgings for the enslaved, and the Villa Urbana, where the owner and his family enjoy relative comfort, surrounded by sculptures, pergolas, and fountains. The villas are also places of agricultural experimentation and technological innovation, where vineyards, olive groves, and vegetable gardens are cultivated with techniques that centuries later will continue to inspire farmers throughout the Mediterranean basin. If the domus represent the embodiment of urban power and the insulae the survival through adversity, the villas are the expression of the Roman ideal of otium, productive leisure, time dedicated to cultivating the mind and spirit, to philosophy, to literature, and to the serene enjoyment of nature. Cicero, Seneca, Pliny, all of them, immortal figures of my intellectual tradition, wrote, contemplated, and lived in these spaces where human artifice integrates gently with the natural world. And thus, through columns, walls, corridors, and courtyards, I continue to shelter the bodies and dreams of my sons and daughters. Each domus, each insula, each villa is a cell of a greater organism, which is me, Rome. My houses are mirrors of virtues and vices, of privileges and deprivations, of aspirations and limits that define my society. And even when these walls of mortar crumble with time, even when the roofs collapse and the mosaics disintegrate into forgotten fragments beneath the earth, I will persist indelibly as the memory of the space that once sheltered those who dared to call me home. Although I take pride in the legions that defend my borders and the magistrates who govern under the weight of the laws, it is in the time of leisure, of rest, and of pleasure that my soul most shamelessly reveals the human and vibrant face of its essence. I am a city forged by labor and discipline indeed, but I am also a stage where delight, amusement, and relaxation are elevated to art, to ritual, to spectacle. For here, in my paved streets and in my immortal monuments, leisure is not a vice but a recognized and legitimized necessity, capable of reinforcing social bonds, affirming hierarchy, and displaying the generosity of the elites to the people I sustain. No space better synthesizes this vocation for pleasure than the baths, architectural complexes that, far beyond their hygienic function, are true centers of social, cultural, and political life. From the modest neighborhood baths to grand works of engineering, such as the baths of Caracalla or the baths of Diocletian, built centuries later, all are organized according to a logic aimed at the well-being of the body and the elevation of the spirit. The Roman citizen slowly traverses a sensory itinerary that begins in the apoditerium, where he undresses and stores his belongings, moves through the tepidarium, a warm acclimatization room, and reaches the caldarium, a hot and humid space where steam penetrates the skin, relaxes the muscles, and expels impurities. After this immersion, the frigidarium awaits with its cold and invigorating waters, closing the cycle of physical and emotional purification. But beyond the baths, the thermae offer gymnasiums for exercise, libraries for study, gardens for strolling, and of course spaces for conversation, for the true bath is not just that of the body, but also of the word, of the gaze, of the subtle exchange that keeps cohesive the social fabric of this infinite herb that I am. If the thermae are the space of ordered and ritualized leisure, the tabernae, on the other hand, are the territory of spontaneous pleasure, of informal socialization, of unexpected encounters. Scattered throughout all my regions, from the most noble to the most popular, these small houses of food and drink offer walkers, workers, and travelers a pause in the frenetic rhythm of the city. There, simple foods are served, such as bread with cheese, olives, boiled eggs, dishes of legumes, and of course wine, the fundamental drink of my people, always mixed with water and often flavored with honey, spices, or resins. The tabernae are democratic spaces where citizens of various classes meet, play dice, discuss politics, or simply seek company. Not infrequently, they also function as lupernaria, housing prostitutes who offer to those who can pay more than the comfort of a plate or a cup. These are vibrant, noisy places, often of ill repute, but essential to the social vitality that defines me. And then there are the games, the ultimate expression of my people's playful and competitive nature. From children's games with animal bones, the ancestors of modern dice, to the complex boards of La Trunculi, a military strategy game, and the athletic competitions organized in the palastrae annexed to the baths, play permeates all aspects of my daily existence. It is a metaphor for life and for war, a preparation for victory and defeat, a field of exercise for virtues and fortuna. But no game, no amusement, No performance compares in magnitude and passion to the public spectacles I offer in my circuses, theatres, and amphitheatres. The Circus Maximus, with a capacity for more than 150,000 spectators, is the largest and most magnificent entertainment venue in my history. Their chariot and quadriga races are more than sporting competitions. They are political events, occasions for demonstrating the generositas of the magistrates who sponsor them, as well as for the often violent expression of popular passions, divided between factions such as the Greens and the Blues. In the theatres such as those of Pompey or Marcellus, the people watch comedies or tragedies, often of Greek authorship, adapted to Roman taste and interspersed with allusions to local politics or social behavior. Satire, the literary genre par excellence of my poets, finds there a scenic echo, challenging authorities and customs under the ambiguous protection of artistic performance. And of course in the amphitheatres, such as the Colosseum, which centuries later will be the apex of this architecture, gladiatorial combats are held where men, free or enslaved, face each other in bloody duels to the delirium of the crowd. These spectacles are a form of extreme theatre, where violence is aestheticized, ritualized, and integrated into the social pedagogy I teach. Strength, courage, endurance of suffering. These are Roman virtues that are exposed there in raw flesh for all to see, to fear, and to revere. Leisure, therefore, is for me not merely an escape from routine or a whim of the elites. It is a sophisticated mechanism of social cohesion, of maintaining order, and of affirming the values that sustain me. Through it, I reinforce hierarchy, redistribute prestige, exercise tensions, and nourish the restless soul of those who inhabit me. And so, day after day, I continue to offer each one the space and the time for rest, for amusement, and for pleasure. Like a mother who knows that her children, after the fatigue of labor and the weight of responsibilities, also need the balm of leisure. For I am Rome, and in me one works, one fights, one conspires, and one governs, but also and perhaps above all one lives. I am a city of marble and gold, of monumental temples and imposing forums, but beneath the grandeur of my columns and under the shadow of my statues the heart of labor beats incessantly, the silent and relentless work that sustains and perpetuates my existence. For if glory belongs to emperors and senators, and fame to poets and generals, it is upon the calloused shoulders of workers, artisans, merchants, and the enslaved that the colossal weight of my eternity has always rested. At daybreak, long before magistrates adorn themselves with their purple garments or philosophers begin their discourses in the porticos, the characteristic sounds of the workshops already echo through my alleys and lanes, hammers striking, anvils resonating, blades sliding. The officinae, scattered across neighborhoods such as the Subura or Trastevere, are small and cramped, but vibrant with creative and productive energy. There, the Faber, the iron craftsman, forges weapons and tools. The Figulus molds clay into amphorae, jars and statuettes. The Coriarius works leather. The Marmorarius sculpts marble into columns, altars and statues that will adorn the temples and palaces of the city. Each of these trades is heir to an ancestral tradition, passed down from master to apprentice through long years of silent and exhausting practice. The Roman artisan's pride resides not only in the beauty or utility of his work, but in the certainty that through it he contributes to the great machinery that I am, Rome, the eternal urbe. Beyond the workshops, it is the markets, the fora, that are the true commercial nerves maintaining the vitality of my urban organism. The Forum Romanum, political and religious center, is also a space of commerce, but other specialized forums occupy distinct parts of the city. In the Forum Boreum, along the banks of the Tiber, livestock trade has taken place since time immemorial. There, oxen, sheep and pigs are bought, slaughtered and prepared to supply Roman tables. In the Forum Holitorium, the vegetable market, the pungent aroma of lettuces, leeks and fava beans mingles with the bustle of customers vying for the freshest produce. The Macella, covered and organized markets, are the most sophisticated centers of food trade. The Macellum Magnum, built under Nero, will become an iconic example of this typology, with shops arranged around courtyards, public fountains, and statues celebrating imperial prosperity and generosity. In these spaces, Local vendors coexist with merchants from distant provinces, bringing olive oil from Baetica, grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, spices from Arabia, silks from China, and amber from the Baltic. For I am Rome, and the entire world converges upon me, bringing not only products but also cultures, languages, gods, and customs. But labor within me is not limited to production and commerce. It is in public administration, in the legions, in construction, and above all in slavery, that the silent foundations of my prosperity are found. Slavery is the hidden engine of my social and economic machine. There is no sphere of Roman life that is not, in some way, permeated by the labor of the enslaved, captured in expansionist wars, purchased in the markets of Antioch, Corinth, or Carthage, or born already under the yoke of servitude. The servi and ancilli are omnipresent. In the domus as child caretakers, cooks, secretaries, and pedagogues, in the workshops as assistants and apprentices, in the fields as arms that reap, plough, and harvest, in the mines and quarries as bodies exhausted to the limits of the possible. Some, through earned trust or technical specialization, may ascend to positions of relative autonomy and comfort, becoming villagii, administrators of rural estates, or even peculium, enslaved persons who, by accumulating personal resources, may aspire to manumission, to legal freedom, and in certain cases to full Roman citizenship. But for most, the destiny is incessant labor, social invisibility, and total submission to the will of the dominus, the master, who holds absolute power over their life and death. Free workers, plebeians, freedmen, and resident foreigners occupy an intermediate position within this vast social spectrum. Some prosper as merchants, artisans, or service providers. Others, less fortunate, survive as operarii, day laborers contracted for various tasks, carrying goods, cleaning streets, building aqueducts, or erecting walls. Construction work in particular is a constant and vital necessity, for I am always in transformation. New temples rise, ancient walls expand, roads stretch toward distant provinces. The operarii face long and dangerous workdays, often under precarious conditions, but they know their strength is indispensable to keeping me alive and thriving. And I, Rome, celebrate them not with statues or praise, but with the silent certainty that as long as their arms continue moving stone, wood, and iron, I will continue to grow, to expand, to resist time and the elements. Labor within me is also a means of integration and social mobility. Many freedmen, former enslaved persons, become successful merchants, financiers of public spectacles, or even patrons of new buildings. The testimony of this can be found in the inscriptions adorning tombstones and monuments, where names once obscured by servile status are immortalized as honored citizens, patrons, and even priests. Thus, beneath the grand veil of my triumphal arches, under the cool shadows of my aqueducts, and beneath the lofty domes of my temples, pulses, unseen yet indomitable, the force of human labor that sustains me. I am the city of victories and banquets, of laws and gods, but I am also, and always will be, the city of those who build, produce, and toil, often in silence, often without glory, but always with a dignity that neither time nor death can erase. Above all, I am a sacred city. Every stone that composes my streets, every column that sustains my temples, every fountain that refreshes my gardens carries the invisible, yet undeniable, mark of the divine presence that animates me. In me, the everyday and the sacred intertwine like the ivy climbing the walls of my forums, inseparable, inevitable, eternal. For the Roman, to live is also to worship, to obey, and to honor a pantheon as vast as it is complex, where household gods and great imperial deities coexist, compete, and complement one another, organizing time, space, and even the most banal gestures of daily life. At the heart of each domus, in the silent corner of the home, rises the lararium, a small altar consecrated to the lares, penates, and manes, the protective spirits of the family, the pantry, and the ancestors. Even before the sun bathes the rooftops of Rome, the pater familias performs there the sacrum domesticum, a morning ritual in which he offers flowers, cakes of flour, or small libations of wine, pleading for protection, fertility, and harmony for his house and his genes. No day, no event, no family decision occurs without first consulting and appeasing these tutelary spirits, for a family's fortune is inextricably linked to the favor of its household gods. But religiosity in me is not limited to private space. On the contrary, it overflows into the streets, the markets, the forums, and above all the temples that punctuate my landscape with their austere grandeur. From Jupiter Capitolinus, king of the gods, whose colossal statue dominates the Capitoline, to Janus, guardian of doors and passages, whose bifrontal image attentively watches those who enter and leave the city. From Vesta, goddess of the eternal flame that burns uninterruptedly under the vigilance of the chaste Vestals, to Mars, lord of war and mythical father of my foundation. Each deity has its space, its priesthood, its cult, its function. The Roman calendar, meticulously structured, is a true script of celebrations, processions, and sacrifices that rhythm the year and shape the social and political life of the city. From the Saturnalia, festivities of social inversion and unrestrained revelry that occur at the end of December, to the austere Perilia, celebrating the founding of Rome on April 21st, passing through the Lupercalia, marked by rituals of purification and fertility. Each festival mobilizes magistrates, priests, and the people, transforming my streets into stages of a living, collective, and often spectacular religiosity. The priests, pontiffs, augurs, flamines play fundamental roles in this complex religious apparatus. The pontiffs, gathered under the leadership of the Pontifex Maximus, ensure the correct execution of rites and the preservation of the fasti, the public calendar. The augurs interpret auspices, signs sent by the gods through the flight of birds, animal behavior, or natural phenomena. The flamines dedicate themselves exclusively to the cult of a specific deity, obeying strict norms of purity and conduct. Among all these priesthoods, that of the Vestals stands out. The virgins consecrated to the cult of Vesta, chosen as children between 6 and 10 years of age from patrician families, they dedicate 30 years of their lives to maintaining the sacred fire that burns in the temple of Vesta, symbol of the perpetuity and security of Rome. Their chastity, an indispensable condition for the exercise of their office, is guarded with severity. Any breach of this vow entails an exemplary punishment, live burial, a penalty that testifies to the seriousness with which I treat sacred pacts and the discipline that sustains my order. But my religiosity is not static. I am a city that incorporates, adapts, and transforms foreign cults as I expand across the world. Thus, the Etruscan gods were absorbed and reinterpreted, the Greek admired and adopted under new guises, the Eastern, like Isis of Egypt or Cybele of Phrygia, introduced with fascination and at times with fear. In the suburbs and along the banks of the Tiber, temples and sanctuaries dedicated to these exotic divinities proliferate, attracting both resident foreigners and curious or devoted Romans. And there are also the mysteries, secret initiatory cults reserved for a few, such as those of Mithras or the Bacchic rites, that offer the promise of individual salvation, of spiritual transcendence, and that often arouse the distrust of the authorities, always vigilant about practices that escape public control. Nor can I forget the political function of religion within my social structure. Every magistrate, upon assuming office, performs public sacrifices, consults the auspices, and presents himself as a mediator between the gods and the community. Military victories are celebrated with triumphal processions, culminating in grand sacrifices, such as the Suovetorilia, the simultaneous sacrifice of a pig, a sheep, and a bull, offered to thank the gods and purify the army and the city. Religion permeates every moment of daily life. Upon leaving the house, the citizen salutes Janus. Upon crossing a bridge, he invokes the river god. When beginning a meal, he dedicates the first portions to the lares. Upon falling ill, he turns to the gods of healing. Upon dying, he is accompanied by rites that ensure safe passage to the world of the dead, preventing his soul from wandering as a lemur, a restless spirit. Thus I continue, eternally crossed by the sacred, shaping and being shaped by the devotion of those who inhabit me. There is no separation between the profane and the divine in my arteries. Every action is in some way also a cult, every space potentially also a temple. And even when new beliefs arise, challenging the old gods and raising crosses upon ancient altars, I will persist, for I am Rome, the city where man and the divine meet and recognize each other as part of the same eternal destiny. I am a city built by soldiers, magistrates, and artisans, but I am also forged in the silent rooms where children learn the art of being Roman. In me, education is not merely the transmission of knowledge. It is a meticulous process of molding character, of forging discipline and virtues, the values that sustain my social and political order. Every child born under my skies is, above all, a project of citizenship, a potential defender and perpetuator of the customs and laws that define me. The birth of a child is celebrated with joy, but also with sobriety, for there is no guarantee of survival in the early years of life. The paterfamilias, absolute master of the household, is the one who decides with a silent gesture whether the newborn will be accepted into the family or exposed to fate outside the home, a destiny often reserved for sickly or illegitimate children. Those who are accepted undergo the initial rites that mark their entry into society, the dies lustricus, or day of purification, on the 8th day for girls and the 9th for boys, when they officially receive a name and a small bulla, a protective amulet they will wear around their neck until reaching maturity. Roman childhood is not a time of innocence or carefreeness, but a stage of rigorous preparation for the fulfillment of the duties imposed by adult life. For boys, especially those from free and affluent families, the educational process is systematic and gradual, aimed at forming not only a man capable of providing for his family, but above all, a citizen fit to serve the Republic and defend the city with honor. Until the age of 7, children remain under the care of the mother, the nutrix, often an enslaved woman responsible for nursing and primary care, and the pedagogi, enslaved individuals specialized in early education, who supervise play, early learning, and above all the development of discipline and obedience. At 7 years old, formal schooling begins under the guidance of the literator, a teacher who instructs in the first letters, reading, writing, and rudiments of arithmetic, using wax tablets, metal styluses, and papyrus scrolls. For those who show talent or whose families can bear the cost, education continues under the grammaticus, a master who introduces young men to the study of grammar, poetry, history, and philosophy, with special emphasis on Greek literature, considered the matrix of civilized culture. It is at this moment that young Romans become familiar with the verses of Homer and Virgil, the speeches of Demosthenes and Cicero, and the teachings of the Stoics and Epicureans, learning not only to master words, but to think, to argue, to persuade. Those who aspire to a public or legal career continue their studies under the tutelage of the rhetor, a master of rhetoric who teaches them the art of oratory, considered essential for political life. It is in public squares and courts that future senators and magistrates forge their reputations, and it is through mastery of speech that they win allies, convince the people, and guide the destiny of the city. But education is not limited to the intellect. The formation of the body is equally valued, for a Roman citizen must be vigorous, resilient, and skilled in handling weapons. From an early age, boys practice physical exercises in the palestra, training grounds annexed to the baths, where they run, swim, wrestle, and learn to wield the pilum and the gladius, indispensable tools for those who may one day join the legions and defend the empire's frontiers. Girls, in turn, though excluded from formal education preparing for public life, are not idle. From an early age, they are instructed by mothers and enslaved women in domestic tasks, spinning, weaving, cooking, managing the household. They also learn the religious rituals required of them as future matronae and cultivate the feminine virtues most prized by Roman society: pudicitia, modesty; fides, fidelity; and pietas, devotion to the gods and the family. However, there are not few women who, defying the limits imposed by tradition, dedicate themselves to reading, poetry, music, or philosophy, leaving in some cases indelible marks on my history, like Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, celebrated for her erudition and moral rectitude, or Hypatia, the Neoplatonist philosopher, who centuries later will face prejudice and violence, but will not renounce free thought. Amidst this educational process, childhood is not devoid of leisure. Children play with clay or ivory dolls, play dice games with animal bones, chase after hoops, and amuse themselves with small theatrical performances. But even play, in me, has a pedagogical function to prepare the body and spirit for the responsibilities of adult life. Upon reaching puberty, boys undergo one of the most significant rituals of their formation, the exchange of the toga praetexta, worn in childhood, for the toga virilis, symbolizing full entry into civic life and the assumption of citizen duties. The ceremony, held in the Forum or on the Capitoline, is a moment of family pride and public affirmation, sealing the young man's commitment to the city and to the gods who protect it. And so, through a continuous process of instruction, discipline, and rituals, I form not just individuals but Roman citizens, men and women who perpetuate my order, who honor my ancestors, who defend my frontiers, and who transmit from generation to generation the legacy of this herb that is at once mother, teacher, and destiny. For I am Rome, and every child I welcome, educate, and prepare is another stone in the construction of my eternity. In my streets, squares, and temples walk feminine figures who, although often silenced by the pens of historians or hidden behind the statues that glorify warriors and emperors, shape, with their constant and discreet presence, the vital fabric that constitutes me. I am a city where woman is at once guardian of tradition and agent of transformation, where her primary sphere is the home, but where her influence transcends the walls of the house and reverberates through the political, social, and religious structures that sustain me. The Roman ideal of womanhood rests, since the most ancient times, on three pillars: chastity, fidelity, and devotion to the gods and the family. The matrona, the respectable lady of the domus, plays a fundamental role in household administration, supervising the activities of enslaved women, organizing the home supply, educating the children, and ensuring the continuity of the genes, the family lineage that for me Rome is more than an identity. It is an indispensable cell for the order and perpetuation of my people. From a young age, the woman is prepared for this destiny. Her marriage is, in most cases, not the result of choice or passion, but of alliances carefully orchestrated between families seeking to consolidate power, influence, and patrimony. Thus, matrimony is a social and legal contract, regulated by norms that determine mutual rights and duties, but above all reaffirm the woman's role as a link between two families, as guardian of domestic virtue and as mother of new citizens. But if the private space is her domain par excellence, it does not mean that the Roman woman is absent from public life. On the contrary, her presence is visible and indispensable in religious rituals, public festivities, and at times, even in political maneuvers. The matronae actively participate in religious celebrations, bearing offerings to the gods, leading processions, and ensuring, through their prayers and rituals, the divine protection over the city. The Vestals, priestesses of Vesta, are the most notorious and revered example of this female presence in the sacred space. Chosen from the best families, they consecrate themselves to the guardianship of the eternal flame burning at the heart of the herbs, symbolizing the continuity and invulnerability of Rome. There are also women who, through their intelligence, beauty, or fortune, attain notoriety and influence, challenging the limits imposed by tradition. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, is celebrated for her education and for the moral formation of her sons, tribunes who sought to reform the Republic. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, plays a decisive role in imperial politics, guiding strategies, alliances, and successions, even if under the appearance of discretion and submission. Agrippina, Messalina, Poppaea, names that, for some, evoke ambition, seduction, and intrigue, for others, resistance and agency in a world dominated by men. For women of the humbler classes, life is shaped by other realities, harsher and less celebrated. Many work in family workshops, sell products in markets, or offer services in tabernae and lupanaria, where the female body becomes commodity, an instrument of survival. Others, enslaved, live under the absolute dominion of their masters, performing the most arduous tasks and often subjected to abuses that reduce them to objects, deprived of the legal protection afforded to free women. Yet, even in the interstices of the society that erects me, women find ways to assert their presence, to create, to resist. Many freed women achieve economic autonomy, manage businesses, finance public works, and even leave funerary inscriptions that testify to their journeys, immortalizing their names in stone, a silent victory over oblivion. In law, Roman women live under male tutela, first under the father, then the husband, but over the centuries they gradually gain greater freedom and legal capacity, especially regarding property management and inheritance. The Lex Julia and the Lex Papia Poppaea, enacted under Augustus, encourage motherhood and grant benefits to women who bear multiple children, recognizing, albeit in a utilitarian way, their vital importance for the perpetuation of society. In dress, in speech, in gesture, the Roman woman communicates her position and social role. The matrona wears the stola, long and sober, accompanied by the palla, a mantle that envelops the body with elegance and modesty, while meretrices and actresses adopt more daring outfits, vibrant colors, and provocative adornments, marking through appearance their exclusion from the ideal of respectability that Rome so highly esteems. Thus, between private life and public presence, between duty and desire, between tradition and subversion, the Roman woman inhabits and transforms this city that I am. I am built by male hands, it is true, but I am silently sustained by female hearts that educate, worship, love, and at times govern, even when history hesitates to acknowledge them. And so I continue Rome with my women, whether invisible or illustrious, submissive or insurgent, who generation after generation draw with their firm or discreet steps the path of this herbs that would not be and could never be the same without them. I am a city where physical vigor is celebrated, where bodily endurance is admired, and where health, though often threatened by epidemics and the risks of urban life, is the object of constant care, traditional practices, and innovations that, centuries later, will still echo in the treatises and procedures of other peoples. In me, medicine is not merely a technical knowledge, but an expression of my worldview, a reflection of the harmony I seek to establish between body, spirit, and cosmos. The health of the Roman citizen begins with the very urban planning that defines me. Wide streets for air circulation, public fountains for the supply of clean water, majestic aqueducts that transport, across dozens of kilometers, the pure water from the mountains to the reservoirs that supply my neighborhoods. The cloacae, underground sewer systems, testify to the ingenuity of my engineers and the commitment to the salubrity of public spaces. Thus, not only in my temples and forums, but also beneath my pavements, pulses an invisible network that protects and preserves the health of those who inhabit me. In the thermae, fundamental spaces for leisure but also for hygiene and disease prevention, my citizens practice regular bathing, physical exercise, and massage, activities considered indispensable for maintaining the balance of the humors, the foundational principle of the Hippocratic medicine that I guide and perpetuate. The culture of bathing, more than a habit, is a purification ritual that reinforces the idea that a clean body is also a virtuous body, worthy and prepared for the challenges of public and private life. In the field of medicine proper, I embrace a plural tradition, amalgamating Etruscan, Greek, and Egyptian knowledge, transforming them into a flexible and pragmatic therapeutic practice. My physicians, the Medici, are varied figures. Some work in the homes of patricians, offering personalized treatments. Some set up in shops or workshops, selling ointments, plasters, and infusions. Others serve in the legions, accompanying soldiers on campaigns and treating wounds and illnesses in camps and field hospitals. Treatments are generally guided by the principle of the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, whose disproportion is considered the cause of disease. To restore this balance, specific diets, exercises, therapeutic baths, bloodletting, and purges are employed, as well as medicinal plants, many cultivated in domestic gardens or gathered from the hills and forests that surround me. Among the most renowned physicians I host or inspire stands Galen, who, centuries later, will masterfully synthesize the medical knowledge of the ancient world, influencing not only Roman practice, but also medieval and Renaissance medicine. His work, though posterior to my Republican era, represents the culmination of a path initiated much earlier, when the first Greek physicians docked at my ports and began offering their services to my citizens and elites. Alongside formal medicine, coexist popular practices, religious rituals, and magical beliefs. For many of my inhabitants believe that healing depends not only on the physician's skill, but also on the god's benevolence and the power of words and symbols. The temples dedicated to Aesculapius, god of medicine, rise as sacred spaces of healing and rest. where the sick perform rituals, make offerings, and sometimes sleep in search of revelatory dreams that might show them the way to health. Women, especially elder ones, play a central role in domestic medical practices. They prepare teas and poultices, assist in childbirth, a function carried out by obstetrices or obstetrics, and transmit empirical knowledge about herbs, diets, and care for the body and soul. Medicine in me is therefore a knowledge that circulates at multiple levels, in scholars' treatises, in healers' recipes, in surgeons' procedures, in the prayers of the faithful. Despite all this care, disease is a constant, inevitable, and sometimes devastating presence. Epidemics sweep through my alleys with the same speed that legions march to war. Fevers and infections claim lives prematurely. Injuries, in a society where physical labor is intense and violence is routine, are frequent and often fatal. Life expectancy for many does not exceed 30 or 40 years, and infant mortality is high, imposing a rhythm of mourning and renewal that profoundly marks my demography and my culture. Yet, even in the face of the fragility inherent to the human condition, I celebrate the resilience and the relentless pursuit of healing, relief and well-being that animates my sons and daughters. For I am Rome, the city that does not fear death but confronts it with dignity, that seeks health with intelligence, and that transforms medicine into an art that transcends time, perpetuating knowledge and practices that, centuries later, will still be remembered, studied, and revered. And thus I continue, healing, treating, and when necessary, consoling, for I know that in each body that rises after a fever, in each wound that heals after combat, in each life that persists despite pain, I too am reborn eternally. I am a city in constant motion, an organism whose veins extend far beyond my walls, winding through hills, valleys, mountains, and deserts, until they touch the edges of the known world. Transport and mobility are the blood that pulses incessantly through me, keeping alive the communication between my most remote neighborhoods and the farthest provinces of the empire I built with sword, law, and stone. Every road, every bridge, every waterway is a testament to the ingenuity and determination of my sons, and a symbol of the power that I am. Within me, streets paved with irregular stone slabs, the silha that even today challenges the feet of those who walk them, are organized into a network that obeys both practical needs and the constraints of the terrain that shapes me. The main roads are wide, allowing the passage of carts, horses, and pedestrians, while the alleys that twist through the more popular neighborhoods are narrow, winding, and often congested with life and voices. During the day, the traffic is chaotic. Street vendors push carts full of goods, artisans transport tools, entire families move toward markets or temples, magistrates traverse the streets flanked by entourages of clients and enslaved people, and above all, resounds the incessant noise of cartwheels upon the stone. To regulate this disorderly flow, I have established rules that restrict the circulation of vehicles at certain hours of the day, especially around the Forum, where excessive traffic could compromise the order and solemnity of political and religious activities. Thus, at night, when shadows stretch across my columns and porticos, the rumble of carts and pack animals echoes through the streets, while public guards, the Tresvieri Nocturni, patrol the city to prevent fires and crimes. But it is not only the internal streets that define me. I am above all the city that invented the road as an instrument of domination, integration, and civilization. The Via Appia, Queen of the Roads, traced in the 4th century before Christ, connects me to Capua, Beneventum, Tarentum, and finally to Brundisium, from where ships depart to Greece and the East. Like it, other roads radiate from me, forming a web that links cities, fortresses, villages, and ports, ensuring the circulation of goods, troops, messages, and people. These roads are more than simple paths. They are monumental works, conceived with a technique that combines solidity and efficiency. First, the bed is excavated and leveled. Then successive layers of stone, sand, and mortar are compacted until forming a surface resistant to the weight of legions and the wear of time. In many stretches, they are flanked by milestone markers, indicating distances and, at times, exalting the magistrate or emperor responsible for the work. For in me, to build is always also a political act, an affirmation of power and permanence. The transport of goods and people is carried out by various means, adapted to the nature of the journey, and the social status of travelers. Carts pulled by oxen or mules are the most common means for transporting heavy loads. Amphorae of wine, sacks of grain, blocks of marble. Horses, fast and agile, are used for the delivery of official messages, the cursus publicus, an imperial postal system that ensures efficient communication between Rome and its provinces, allowing orders, decrees, and reports to travel hundreds of kilometers in a few days. Wealthier travelers move in comfortable carriages, the carpenter or red-eye, which, although slower than horses, offer protection against the elements and ensure a relatively safe and dignified journey. Meanwhile, the poor travel on foot, facing the dust and fatigue of long journeys with resignation or hope. The river and maritime routes complement this mobility system. The Tiber, which traverses me with its perennial current, is a vital artery for transporting goods to the port of Ostia, from where ships depart to supply the city with grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, marble from Greece, and spices from India. The vessels propelled by sail or oar are diverse, from small fishing boats to the imposing merchant ships and military triremes that patrol the routes of the Mare Nostrum, ensuring the safety of convoys and the naval hegemony that allows me to dominate not only the land but also the sea. Grand bridges, such as the Pons Aemilius or the Pons Fabricius, cross the Tiber and other rivers, connecting neighborhoods, facilitating traffic, and symbolizing, once again, human dominion over nature. The aqueducts, although destined for water transport, are also paths of circulation for those daring enough to traverse their arches and galleries, exploring the hidden meanders of my infrastructure. But mobility is not only physical, it is also social and symbolic. Every displacement is a movement within the order I establish. The soldier marching to war and years later, returning as a veteran and landowner. The magistrate traveling through the city in his cella curulis, displaying his dignitas. The pilgrim journeying to a distant sanctuary to fulfill a vow. The merchant crossing seas in search of profit. The enslaved person transported against their will to serve in a foreign land. Thus I continue eternally in motion, for I am Rome, the city that built roads to conquer the world, that erected bridges to unite peoples, and that navigated rivers and seas to assert its presence in every corner of the orb. In every footprint marking the dust of my roads, in every wheel carving the stone of my pavements, in every sail swelling in the wind at my ports, I renew my destiny to be not just a city, but the axis around which civilization turns. I am more than a city of marble, a city of laws. My true foundation does not rest solely on the hills where I raised my walls, but upon the invisible yet omnipresent corpus of norms that regulate every aspect of the lives of those who inhabit me. From the moment a citizen steps onto my worn stones, they are surrounded by a web of rights, duties, prohibitions, and permissions that, although shaped over centuries, remain as solid as the arches of my basilicas and as flexible as the currents of the Tiber that cross me. The legal system I organize is one of the most precious legacies I shall transmit to posterity. Since the codification of the 12 Tables in the mid-5th century before Christ, I established that the law must be known by all, even if interpreted and applied by only a few. Initially engraved on bronze and displayed in the Forum, the tables enshrine the revolutionary idea that law is a public good, not a secret instrument in the hands of priests or the powerful. From them, a legal tradition flourishes, expanding in complexity and refinement, accompanying the very expansion of my empire. In daily life, Roman citizenship is the passport to the enjoyment of privileges and the imposition of duties. To be civis Romanus is to carry a status of honor and protection that crosses borders and surpasses the walls of the city. The citizen enjoys the right to property, to enter into contracts, to contract legitimate marriage, to appeal to courts, and, in extreme cases, to invoke the emperor in search of justice. No citizen can be subjected to torture or capital punishment without trial, except in exceptional situations. Yet this legal protection is not a mantle that extends equally to all. It is, rather, a carefully demarcated prerogative that excludes foreigners, enslaved persons, and, in certain cases, women and freedmen. The legal structure I maintain is headed by magistrates, praetors, aediles, quaestors, and consuls, who, in addition to administering the city, also judge, issue edicts, and guide the interpretation of the laws. The urban praetor in particular plays a fundamental role by establishing legal formulas that flexibly adapt the norms to the demands of daily life. The legal casuistry that flourishes from these edicts is vast and sophisticated, addressing everything from property and commerce to family disputes and succession conflicts. The courts of justice, located in basilicas and forums, are public and accessible spaces where lawyers, the orators, present their cases with eloquence, often more concerned with rhetorical brilliance than legal precision. Law in me is therefore not merely a rational practice, but also a performative art, where persuasive words can determine the fate of a citizen. Alongside civil justice, I maintain a criminal justice system aimed at ensuring order and public security. Crimes such as homicide, theft, adultery, and treason are punished with rigor, ranging from fines and exile to flogging, penal servitude, and, in the gravest cases, execution. Punishment is not only a penalty imposed on the offender, but also a spectacle that reaffirms the strength of the law and the sovereignty of the state. In public squares, the suffering of the condemned serves as a warning to others. Whoever transgresses the order that I am defies Rome itself. Beyond repression, I use law as an instrument of integration and expansion. By granting citizenship to allied communities, veterans of the legions or distinguished individuals, I incorporate peoples and territories into my political body, diluting ethnic and linguistic distinctions in favor of a common legal identity. Civis Romanus sum. This policy, timidly initiated during the Republic, will reach its apex with the Edict of Caracalla in the 3rd century after Christ, when I shall extend citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire, thus consolidating my universal vocation. But the law I practice is not limited to written codification. It also lives in customs, the mores maiorum, transmitted orally and reiterated through daily practice. The authority of the pater familias over his household, the obligation to honor the gods and ancestors, the reciprocity between patrons and clients, the veneration for a given word. All this is law, even if not inscribed on tablets or parchments. Thus, I am a city where legal norms and tradition coexist in productive tension, continually renewing each other and ensuring the continuity of social order. Citizenship, in turn, is not merely a legal status, it is an identity, a pride, a responsibility. It implies participation in political life, voting in assemblies, serving in the legions, holding magistracies, and obliges respect for the laws and contribution to the common good. The Roman ideal does not conceive of the citizen as an isolated individual, but as an integral and active part of the res publica, the public thing, which belongs to all and demands sacrifices from all. Thus I continue, enmeshed in this complex web of norms, rights, and duties that define me more profoundly than the walls that surround me or the monuments that ennoble me. For I am Rome, the city of laws, the urbs where justice is not only an ideal, but a daily practice, an invisible thread that unites rich and poor, free and enslaved, native and foreigner, in a single and eternal pact of civilized coexistence. When the sun sets beyond the hills that surround me, and the last shadows of the day stretch over my squares and porticos, another version of me awakens, more hidden, more ambiguous, more free. I am a city that does not sleep, or at least resists rest. For when night cloaks my worn stones and silences the voices of magistrates, matrons, and merchants, other sounds emerge, other presences, other dangers and pleasures that compose the nocturnal life of this eternal urbs that I am. With the fall of night, the scarce light of torches and oil lamps casts flickering shadows upon the walls of the insulae and the arches of the aqueducts. The streets, once teeming with crowds, grow quieter, but never deserted. Loaded carts move through the roads, for many are the restrictions that prohibit the transport of heavy goods during the day, forcing merchants and carters to cross the city under the cloak of night. Their axles creak, the hooves of animals resound upon the stone, and the echo of these activities intermittently pierces the oppressive silence that spreads like a mist over my neighborhoods. But it is not only workers who occupy my nights. In every dimly lit corner, in every narrow alley, figures hide whose presence both fascinates and frightens. Lurking robbers, prostitutes offering their bodies, gamblers consumed by passion and hope, charlatans promising cures and enchantments. The Roman night is thus a space of transgression and freedom, where norms relax, where social control weakens, and where restless souls find outlet for their desires and vices. The taverns, always open, are the privileged meeting points for those seeking shelter, drink, or company. In their cramped interiors, lit only by the flicker of flames, the wine flows freely, mixed with water, honey, and spices, while conversations, laughter, and brawls succeed each other in a frenetic rhythm. Not rarely, in these shadowy environments, conspiracies against power are forged, crimes are plotted, or one simply seeks to forget life's misfortunes. The lupanaria, brothels, proliferate in the most populous and degraded areas, especially in the Subura, a neighborhood infamous for promiscuity and crime. There, sex is sold as a commodity, but also as an ephemeral moment of escape from the rigid social order that governs the Roman day. The prostitutes, many of them enslaved, know well the hidden roots and corners of the night, and are aware that when day is reborn, they will return to anonymity and invisibility, like the very shadows that dissipate under the light of the sun. But not all of the night is marked by marginality. Aristocratic houses receive guests for dinners that stretch into the early hours, accompanied by wine, poetry, music, and philosophy. In the triclinia, beneath shimmering mosaics and colorful frescoes, senators, poets, and patrons debate politics, art, and life, while enslaved attendants discreetly circulate, serving refined dishes and filling gleaming cups. For these, the night is a sophisticated extension of the day, a moment when political alliances are strengthened and reputations consolidated. In public spaces, the night also shelters rituals and religious celebrations. Some festivities, such as the Lemuria, when Romans honor and appease the restless spirits of the dead, are intentionally performed under the protective veil of darkness, when contact with the world of the dead becomes more intense and feared. On such nights, the paterfamilias walks silently through the house, making libations and casting black beans over his shoulder, hoping to ward off the lemures and ensure the peace of the living. But not everything is festivity or devotion. The night is, above all, a space of danger. Crimes multiply as darkness facilitates anonymity and complicates surveillance. Thieves, murderers, and arsonists lurk for the unwary, while organized gangs contest the control of certain regions. To contain these risks, I maintain a night guard composed of the Tresviri Nocturni and the Vigiles, responsible for patrolling the streets, extinguishing fires, and ensuring order. Armed with batons and accompanied by dogs, these guards traverse the streets in groups, alert to any sign of disturbance. Even so, many prefer to avoid leaving home after nightfall, seeking the safe shelter of the domus, where the lararium offers spiritual protection and locked doors provide physical defense. The night within me is an ambivalent territory, at once fascinating and threatening, a space of pleasure and risk, of freedom and violence. And thus I continue Rome, illuminated by the faint light of torches and warmed by the fires of taverns and hearths, yet also shrouded in the thick darkness that houses the deepest secrets of those who inhabit me. The night is not merely the absence of day, but another time, another rhythm, another Rome, more intimate, more dangerous, more true. For I am, and always will be, the city that lives and breathes in every hour, that reinvents itself with each dusk, that does not fear the night, but feeds on it and perpetuates itself within it. I am the city of the living, but also the silent guardian of the dead. My streets vibrate with the energy of markets, forums, and theaters, but beyond my walls, or hidden in the discreet folds of the urban landscape, rest those who came before, those who built me, who fought, who loved, and who, in the end, returned to the earth that nourishes me. For within me, Rome, death is not an absolute end, but a passage regulated by ancestral rites carefully observed, which guarantee the deceased not only memory among the living, but, above all, peace in the world of the dead. Since the earliest days of my history, funerary rites have been a fundamental element of social and religious life. When death approaches, the family gathers around the bedside, watching over the dying and preparing the body for the crossing. The last breath is received with reverence, and the closest relative, traditionally the heir, closes the eyes and collects the final breath with a kiss, sealing the bond between the one departing and those who remain. The body is then washed, perfumed, and dressed in the most dignified garments, prepared to be displayed in the atrium of the house upon a funeral bed adorned with flowers and cypress branches, a plant associated with mourning and eternity. During this period, which may last from 1 to 7 days depending on the deceased's social standing, relatives, friends and clients visit the residence to pay their respects, offer condolences and share in the grief of loss, but also to reinforce the social bonds that transcend death. On the day of the funeral, the body is carried in procession through the city streets to the place of burial or cremation, accompanied by musicians, hired mourners, women contracted to wail loudly, and in patrician families, by actors who reenact the deceased's greatest deeds or embody, through funerary masks, the illustrious ancestors of the genes. This procession is not merely a farewell, but a public affirmation of the family's prestige and virtue, a demonstration of continuity across generations. The body's final destination varies according to the era and family preferences. Cremation, predominant during the Republican period, consists of reducing the body to ashes in a funeral pyre, whose remains are carefully collected and placed in an urn deposited in the family columbarium or in an individual tomb. Burial or inhumation, which will become more common from the 2nd century after Christ, preserves the whole body, laid in a grave dug in the earth, usually protected by a gravestone or funerary monument. The cemeteries, or necropolises, literally cities of the dead, are located by law outside the urban limits, along the roads leading to the city, such as the Via Appia, lined with monumental tombs that eternalize in stone the memory of those who rest there. These monuments are varied, from humble stelae with simple inscriptions to grand mausoleums such as those of Augustus or Hadrian, which impose themselves as landmarks in the landscape and declarations of power and eternity. But the funerary rite does not end with burial. In the days and months that follow, the family performs ceremonies of purification and remembrance, the sacrificium, to appease the gods, the refrigerium, a banquet in honor of the deceased, and the parentalia, annual festivities dedicated to the cult of the ancestors, where the living renew their connection with the dead, visiting tombs, adorning them with flowers, offerings, and libations of wine and honey. For within me, Rome, the dead are neither forgotten nor feared as malevolent forces. When properly honored and appeased, they become manes, benevolent spirits who protect and inspire the family, ensuring its prosperity and continuity. Only those who die without burial or without the appropriate rites become lemures, wandering and restless souls who roam among the living, disturbing their peace and demanding through signs and nightmares that the proper rites be rendered. Thus death, far from being an isolated event, is fully integrated into the cycle of life, as a return to nature, but also as a symbolic permanence in the memory of descendants and in the city's history. The very funerary architecture that adorns my roads testifies to this desire for eternity, inscriptions that recount virtues, sculptures that immortalize faces, epitaphs that reveal affections and ambitions, and I, Rome, guard them all, in silence, as an inseparable part of my essence. Every tomb that lines my roads, every urn resting in my columbaria, every name engraved in my stones is proof that, even in death, I continue to be lived, inhabited, remembered. For I am, and always will be, the city of the living and the dead, the space where generations succeed each other, where life renews itself and where memory perpetuates itself, defying oblivion and proclaiming, with every funerary inscription, the victory of civilization over finitude. I am celebrated for the victories of my legions, for the triumphs of my generals, for the marble that adorns my temples, and for the arches that eternalize my conquests. But beneath the surface of this glory, which I display with pride, pulses a more silent, harsher, more hidden reality. The life of the millions of enslaved people who sustain, with their sweat, their pain, and often their blood, the complex machinery that I am, Rome. The enslaved service is an omnipresent figure in my urbs and in my provinces. They are in the domus, in the workshop, in the farm, on the battlefield, in the mine, in the kitchen, in the market, in the circus. Their existence permeates every sphere of my daily life, and their condition defines invisibly yet undeniably the social structure I maintain. There is not a single path that leads to servitude. Many are prisoners of war, captured in campaigns that expand my dominions from Britannia to the Middle East. Others are children of the enslaved, born already under the yoke of servitude. Some are condemned by debts or crimes, transformed into the property of another man or of the state. Once enslaved, the individual loses their legal autonomy, becoming a res, a thing, that can be bought, sold, punished or rewarded at the absolute will of the dominus, the master. In daily life, the destinies of the enslaved are as diverse as the spaces they occupy. In patrician houses, they perform domestic functions, caring for children as pedagogi, managing the pantry as salari, accompanying their masters to the baths as capsarii, cooking, cleaning, sewing, adorning. Some, possessing exceptional skills and talents, act as secretaries, accountants, doctors, architects or artists, holding high responsibilities, though always under the status of property. In the workshops and factories, the officini, the enslaved perform manual and repetitive tasks, forging weapons, molding pottery, weaving garments, crafting footwear. They are the silent force that produces the goods filling my markets and supplying my legions. In the fields, the latifundia, their labor is even more exhausting and brutal. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, cultivate vines, harvest olives, cut wheat beneath the relentless sun, operating collectively, watched over by vilici and overseers who impose with rod and whip the implacable rhythm of the harvests. To them, little time is left for rest, little hope for relief, little possibility to claim dignity. For these, life is a repeated cycle of labor, exhaustion, and oblivion. Even more terrible is the fate of those sent to the mines and quarries, especially those of salt, silver, and gold, where the conditions are so inhumane that many do not survive beyond a few months. There, in the dark womb of the earth, among narrow tunnels and unbreathable air, bodies break, lungs fill with dust, and hope disappears like the light that never reaches those depths. And yet, even under the weight of this oppression, the enslaved resist and survive. Resistance does not always take the spectacular form of escape or rebellion, though these exist, as attested by numerous uprisings, the most famous of which is that led by Spartacus, who defied my power and shook the confidence of my elites. More often, resistance is silent, a poorly done task, an intentional delay, a subtle sabotage, a defiant gaze, a dream secretly nurtured of one day achieving freedom. And that freedom, though rare and difficult, is not impossible. Manumission, the act by which the master grants freedom to the enslaved, is a regulated practice that allows the freedman, libertus, to ascend to a new social condition. Many freedmen remain close to their former masters, now as clients, bound by ties of gratitude and reciprocity. But they can also prosper, acquire wealth, open businesses, educate free children, and, in some cases, even attain high administrative and priestly positions. The enslaved create bonds among themselves, build families even without legal recognition, share cultures and traditions, sing songs, worship gods, dream. Among them circulate stories of resistance and hope, myths of heroes who broke their chains, memories of lands and times before servitude. I, Rome, know each of these destinies. I am built by the triumphs of my generals, but also by the tears of my enslaved. I am raised by hands that wield swords, but also by those that stack stones and weave fabrics. And although many of the names and lives of these men and women remain absent from my official records, they persist in the mortar of my walls, in the foundations of my roads, in the vigor of my plantations, and in the splendor of my monuments. Thus I continue eternal, sustained by a profound contradiction. I celebrate freedom and citizenship as supreme ideals, yet maintain at the same time a system that subjugates millions. And I know that as long as the desire for freedom exists, there will also exist resistance, silent or resounding, that perpetuates in the darkest of conditions the indomitable flame of human dignity. I am a city that rises for eternity, but that lives intensely each moment. In me, Rome, time is not merely an abstraction, but a concrete force that organizes existence, marks the passage of generations, orders rights, and regulates labor, leisure, and worship. Every dawn, every festivity, every agricultural cycle is a thread I weave to compose the calendar that guides the lives of my citizens and structures. Invisible yet relentless, the rhythm that pulses through my arteries of stone. My calendar, initially simple and marked by lunar cycles, was transformed, under the discipline of my priests and the necessities of public administration, into a work of precision and power. Since the intervention of Julius Caesar in the 1st century before Christ, I adopted the solar calendar, the Julianum, which divides the year into 365 days, with periodic adjustments to correct astronomical discrepancies. With this, I definitively affirmed my dominion over time, organizing the days not only according to nature's whim, but according to the reason and order that define me. Each month in my calendar carries with it a memory, a function, a festivity. January, dedicated to Janus, god of doors and transitions, opens the annual cycle, symbolizing beginnings and reflection on what was and what will be. February is a time of purification, with the Februa and the Lupercalia, celebrating fertility and warding off malevolent forces. March exalts Mars, my mythical father and god of war, marking the resumption of military campaigns and the blossoming of spring. April venerates Venus, goddess of love and beauty, when flowers bloom and the city fills with colors and fragrances. May and June are months of transition, while July and August, renamed to honor the emperors Julius Caesar and Augustus, perpetuate in the very structure of time the memory of those who shaped my history. September, October, November, and December, whose names recall the archaic decimal system, lead to the closing of the cycle, when the fields rest and men prepare for the rigors of winter. But more than the months, it is the festivals that give time its texture and meaning. My year is punctuated by religious, civic, and familial festivities that transform ordinary days into moments of celebration and renewal. The Saturnalia, celebrated in December, subvert the social order. Enslaved persons sit at the table with their masters, gifts are exchanged, houses fill with lights and laughter, and for a few days, freedom and equality are lived as a utopian anticipation of what could be, but is not. The Parentalia in February are dedicated to the cult of ancestors, when families visit tombs, offer flowers, food, and wine, and reinforce the indissoluble link between living and dead. The Lupercalia, also in February, evoke the beginnings of my foundation, with rituals of purification and fertility held in the Lupercal cave where, according to legend, the she-wolf suckled Romulus and Remus. The Floralia festival in April exalts nature's renewal and celebrates Flora, goddess of flowers and spring, with games, dances, and spectacles that fill my streets with vitality. Time within me is also deeply agricultural. The seasons determine the cycles of planting, harvesting, and rest, and the farmers who cultivate the fields that feed me, in the hills of Latium, the plains of Campania, the banks of the Tiber, organize their lives according to the rhythm of the seasons. Spring invites plowing and sowing. Summer demands intense labor harvesting wheat and pressing grapes. Autumn is a time of gathering and preparation, winter of rest and reflection. The day, in turn, is measured both practically and symbolically. From dawn, the city awakens and moves until midday, when the sun reaches its zenith and the most important business concludes. The hours are counted by the sun's position, aided by shadow clocks, gnomons, or water clocks, clepsydras, that mark, with their incessant flow, the passage of time. In the afternoon, activities diminish, and at night, as I have revealed, fear and pleasure intertwine under the protection or threat of darkness. Time is not, for me, merely a succession of instants. It is a social and religious construction, an order that gives meaning to life and perpetuates the memory of past deeds. Therefore, I celebrate on specific dates, military triumphs, temple foundation anniversaries, the dies natalis of emperors, and political victories. Each of these events is more than a commemoration. It is a symbolic updating of my history, a reaffirmation of my destiny of eternity. And thus I continue, Rome, traversing time, shaping it and being shaped by it. I am the city that created a calendar to organize life, and by doing so, also organized the cosmos, subordinating the stars and seasons to human reason and political necessity. In every tick of the clepsydras, in every shadow that lengthens at sunset, in every festival that interrupts daily labor, I renew the certainty that I am more than a city. I am a time, a rhythm, an eternity that pulses incessantly in the heart of humanity. I am a city born from the blood of shepherds and thieves, as the legends say, but over time and through conquest, I became a metropolis of peoples, languages, customs, and gods. In me, Rome, the entire world finds shelter, competes for space, builds dreams, and inevitably is transformed and transforms me. I am and always have been a multicultural city, a crucible where identities do not dissolve but overlap, confront and merge, creating a new social fabric that makes me not just the political center of an empire, but the beating heart of a civilization that sees and affirms itself as universal. As I walk my streets, I perceive in every face the mark of diversity. Greeks with their light tunics and melodic accents settle as doctors, philosophers, artists, and teachers, enriching my culture and teaching my children the secrets of rhetoric, geometry, and medicine. Easterners from Syria, Judea, and Arabia arrive bringing fine fabrics, exotic spices, and new religious cults, like that of Isis, whose promise of life after death captures the hearts of both plebeians and patricians. From North Africa come the Carthaginians, now defeated but not extinct, who dedicate themselves to trade and navigation, the Egyptians with their millenary beliefs and animal-shaped gods, whose priests perform mysterious rituals in the most peripheral suburbs, and the Nubians with their dark skin and golden jewelry, reminding that even the edges of the desert know the name and power of Rome. From the north come the Gauls, the Germans, the Britons, many initially as prisoners or mercenaries, but who over time become soldiers, artisans, merchants, and even citizens, integrated into this social machine that is me. Among them, some keep their tribal customs, their guttural languages, and their animistic beliefs. Others swiftly adopt my language, wear my toga, build my houses, engrave their names on my tombstones, and become indistinguishable, part of this herb that does not ask where you come from but what you can offer. Jewish synagogues discreetly flourish in reserved neighborhoods, offering their faithful a space of worship and identity resistance within a city that, although absorbing many, does not always accept all without restrictions. Religious and ethnic tensions are inevitable, prejudices against Eastern peoples, suspicions regarding mystery cults, accusations of subversive or indecent practices. But at the same time, the pragmatic flexibility that defines me allows multiple ways of life to coexist, and often foreigners find in me more opportunities than they would in their lands of origin. In the squares and markets, Latin is heard, it is true, but also Greek, the lingua franca of commerce and culture, the Coptic of Egyptians, the Aramaic of Syrians, the Celtic of Gauls, and so many other tongues that mix and intertwine, composing a polyglot symphony that echoes among my columns and arches. In the taverns and thermopolia, improvised street kitchens, the dishes diversify, from cereal and legume porridges to Eastern delicacies like dates and pistachios, through salted fish from Hispania and sweet wines from Greece. This diversity is not limited to the material plane. It penetrates deeply into the soul of the city. Foreign gods find space in my temples or on the margins of my neighborhoods. Mithras, whose Persian cult grows among soldiers and merchants. Isis, venerated with processions and secret rituals. Cybele, the great mother of Phrygia, whose castrated priests challenge the limits of gender and social norms. Some of these cults are fully integrated. Others watched with suspicion, especially when they threaten to subvert the political order or challenge the imperial cult. For I am also, and always, a city that seeks to reconcile plurality with unity. Roman citizenship, once a restricted privilege, gradually expands, incorporating conquered peoples, granting first partial rights, and then, over time, full civil and political rights. The Edict of Caracalla in the 3rd century after Christ will consecrate this universal vocation, extending citizenship to all free men of the empire, making Rome not just one city among others, but the city that hosts and defines the world. And yet, I know that this multicultural coexistence is not free from tensions. Foreigners are sometimes targets of hostility, violence, and discriminatory legislation. The poorer foreigners, crowded in precarious insulae, compete for work and space with local citizens, fueling resentments and conflicts. The wealthier foreigners, in turn, arouse envy and suspicion, displaying their exotic garments, their enigmatic rights, and their accumulated riches. But despite everything, I remain the space where all these differences meet, clash, and often amalgamate. I am the city of 1,000 homelands, 1,000 gods, 1,000 stories that intersect, transforming the experience of living in me into a permanent adventure of adaptation, negotiation, and creation. Thus I continue. Rome, cosmopolitan and multiple, integrating and absorbing, rejecting and welcoming, but always growing and renewing myself. I am the mirror where the world contemplates itself, and, at the same time, the crucible where the world merges. And I know that as long as there are peoples willing to cross seas and mountains in search of a future, I will continue to be the destination, where all, somehow, become Romans. I am, par excellence, a city of soldiers. My history was written with blood and sword, my expansion forged by the discipline of the legions, and my security guaranteed by the vigor of men who, with gleaming armor and standards fluttering in the wind, marched, fought, and died in my name. But I am not merely a city of war. In me, Rome, the army is not an entity separate from civil society. On the contrary, it is an intrinsic part of my daily life, a constant presence that shapes the work, the politics, the architecture, and even the very mindset of my inhabitants. The legions, which I have mastered as instruments of domination and defense, are also, paradoxically, artisans of peace and order. When they are not marching to the frontiers of the empire, to the frozen forests of Germania, the burning deserts of Syria, or the vast plains of Dacia, they are here, within me or in my provinces, actively participating in the construction and maintenance of civil life. They erect walls and bridges, open roads, construct aqueducts and fortifications. Every stone set, every arch raised, every mile paved, bears the mark of the patient and meticulous work of soldier engineers who, under strict discipline, transform the world around me into a concrete expression of my power. Within the interior of my city, the military presence is more symbolic but no less important. Praetorian guards, in ceremonial attire, protect the imperial palace and ensure the safety of the prince. They are the custodes, the armed arm that ensures political stability, and that not infrequently intervenes decisively in imperial successions, sometimes protecting, sometimes overthrowing those who sit on the throne. The army is thus also a political actor, whose silent power hovers over the Senate and the people. But beyond the palace intrigues, the military presence permeates the lives of my common citizens. Young Romans, upon reaching adulthood, are conscripted or voluntarily enlist for military service, drawn by the promise of honor, of plunder, of citizenship, for those who do not yet possess it, and of a pension that will ensure security in old age. For many, the army is a path to social advancement, an opportunity to change destiny, to see distant lands, and perhaps to return as a hero or as a landowner, benefiting from the distributions that often accompany the completion of service. The legions, however, are not limited to being instruments of conquest and defense. They are also schools of discipline and citizenship. The soldier learns to obey orders, to work in a team, to build and to destroy with equal effectiveness. He assimilates Roman culture, even if he was born in distant and barbarian lands, becoming, through training and coexistence, more Roman than many who were born within my walls. The legion is thus a factory of Roman identity, a space where identities merge and where the empire reproduces itself not only by force, but by example and coexistence. When soldiers return, whether on temporary leave or at the end of their campaigns, they become respected veterans entitled to land, to legal privileges, and to social honors. Many settle in colonies founded for this purpose, in conquered regions, bringing with them my language, my laws, my gods, my practices. Thus the army is also an agent of Romanization, a living bridge between the city and the provinces, between the center and the fringes of the empire. In daily life, even those who have never wielded a sword feel the presence of the legions. The markets are supplied with products brought by military convoys. The spectacles celebrate victories and triumphs. The monuments exalt the feats of campaigns. The coins bear images of warrior gods and victorious generals. War and militarism are inscribed in my iconography, in my architecture, in my soul. But I also know the cost of this militarism. I know of families who mourn sons who never return, of farmers who, conscripted by force, leave their lands to ruin, of cities that, subjugated, lose their autonomy and their identity. I know of revolts harshly repressed, of legions that, under imperial orders, devastate, burn, and crucify, leaving behind trails of blood and ashes. And yet I cannot deny this part of me. I am Rome. I conquered an empire, raised borders, imposed laws and cultures with the weight of my legions. The army is my flesh and my spirit, my glory and my scar. Thus I continue, eternal, with soldiers marching along my roads, with standards fluttering under my arches, with swords resting beside ploughs, and with armor laid alongside linen tunics. For I know that as long as there are those willing to fight for me, to build for me, to die for me, I will continue being what I am. Rome, the city forged in war but sustained by the peace that only strength can guarantee. I am a monumental body whose limbs stretch across hills, valleys and roads that touch the ends of the world, but my heart beats here, in this open and solemn space where stone and time intertwine, the Roman Forum. Here, under the watchful gaze of statues of gods and heroes, beneath the echoes of orators' voices, and in the shadow of majestic columns, I breathe and recognize myself, day after day, century after century, as the city that I am, the eternal city. The Forum is not merely a physical space, delimited by temples, basilicas, and triumphal arches. It is, above all, a stage where Roman public life unfolds in all its complexity and vitality. Here judgments are passed, negotiations are made, decrees are issued, celebrations are held, and at times conspiracies are plotted and lives are lost. Here citizens gather to hear the magistrates' decisions, to participate in assemblies, to witness religious rites, or simply to pass through, meet acquaintances, comment on the day's news, and feel, in the ceaseless vibration of this space, the very soul of the city. Upon entering the Forum, I am welcomed by the grandeur of its buildings and the density of its history. The Temple of Saturn rises imposingly, guarding the public treasury, signaling that here religion and economy are inextricably intertwined. Nearby, the Temple of Castor and Pollux recalls the protective presence of the gods who, according to legend, fought alongside the Romans at the Battle of Lake Regillus, securing the victory that cemented my youth as a power. The Basilica Aemilia, a space for commerce and administration, shelters merchants, lawyers, and clients who, beneath its elegant arcades, resolve business, contest contracts, and determine the course of fortunes and destinies. The Basilica Julia, begun by Julius Caesar and completed by Augustus, consecrates with its grandeur the power of the dynasty that will forever alter the course of my history. At the center of this scene, the Comitium marks the traditional space for assemblies and elections, where, for centuries, the Roman people exercised their sovereignty, electing magistrates, approving laws, and acclaiming generals. The rostra, the speaker's platform, is the pulpit from which Cicero denounced Catiline, from which tribunes inflamed crowds, and from which many dared to raise their voice against power, paying with their lives for their audacity. But the Forum is not only politics, it is also religion, memory, and spectacle. The Temple of Vesta houses the city's sacred fire, guarded by the Vestals, while the Temple of Caesar, erected after his death and apotheosis, transforms the assassinated dictator into a god, thus eternizing the often dangerous intertwining of human and divine power within me. Among these solemn structures move citizens of all classes, senators in purple-striped togas, hurried merchants, prostitutes seeking clients, lawyers prepared for their eloquent defenses, young apprentices absorbing with eager eyes the movement that teaches more than any school. The Forum is thus the agora of the empire, the radiating center of my authority, the space where the public and collective nature of Roman life is affirmed daily. Every stone of this space is impregnated with history. Here Cicero's head was displayed after his proscription. Here Julius Caesar delivered his most memorable speeches, and was, ironically, condemned by the daggers of his peers. Here, emperors paraded in triumph, prisoners were exhibited, votes were cast, and oaths were sworn. And it is not only the extraordinary events that make the Forum my beating heart. It is, above all, the incessant repetition of everyday activities, trials held, contracts signed, promises made, cults celebrated. In every gesture, in every word, the order that structures me and the identity I share with those who inhabit me are reaffirmed. The Forum is also a space of transition. Over the centuries, it adapts to political and social changes. From the center of the aristocratic republic, it becomes the stage of the imperial monarchy, with new constructions, new monuments, and new functions. But in its essence, it remains the space that connects all Romans, rich and poor, free and enslaved, citizens and foreigners, in a shared urban, political and spiritual experience. Thus I continue, Rome, with my heart exposed to the sky, flanked by columns that defy time, by ruins that bear witness to my glory and my fall, by shadows that guard the echoes of voices long silenced. The Roman Forum is the concrete proof that I am more than stone and marble. I am memory, I am discourse, I am power exercised in public, I am the city that lives through its own representation, and even when time erodes the statues, topples the arches, and silences the voices, the void that remains will still be eloquent, proclaiming to those who come after that here, once, beat the heart of the world. I am Rome, and as I pronounce my own name, I feel within me the weight and the lightness of 1,000 metamorphoses. For if there is one certainty that defines me, it is that I have never remained the same. Like the Tiber, which flows through me with its incessant current, I too have changed, adapted, fallen, and been reborn countless times, traversing centuries of grandeur and decay, of splendor and ruin, of continuity and rupture. I was born small, a village of shepherds on the heights of the Palatine, raised among hills surrounded by sacred groves and marshlands, and from this modest origin, guided by mythical kings like Romulus, my founder, and Numa Pompilius, my sacred legislator, I advanced slowly, consolidating traditions, forging laws, and delineating territories. The monarchy, with its archaic structures, gave way to the republic, and there occurred my first great metamorphosis. From a city ruled by kings, I became a republic of citizens, proud of their freedom and protective of their institutions. The republic shaped my soul with the rigidity of laws and the flexibility of politics. It created the Senate, the popular assemblies, the annual magistrates, and above all, consolidated the idea that power must be shared, limited, and watched over. But it also witnessed the insoluble tensions between patricians and plebeians, the social wars, the slave revolts, and above all, the civil wars that wounded me and transformed me forever. It was with blood that my second great metamorphosis was born, the empire. Under Caesar, Augustus, and their successors, I converted from a republican city to the capital of an empire that embraced 3 continents. I transformed my institutions, expanded my armies, monumentalized my landscape with forums, triumphal arches, aqueducts, and temples of unparalleled grandeur. I became the urbe, the center of the known world, the supreme symbol of power and civilization. The Senate endured, but now under the vigilant gaze of the emperor, the absolute lord whose will shaped laws, wars, and the very lives of my citizens. But even at the imperial apex, transformations continued to pass through me. Incorporating peoples, cultures, gods, and languages, I became more complex, more hybrid. From the east, I welcomed mysterious cults. From the north, warriors and mercenaries. From the south, wealth and knowledge. In my streets, the toga coexisted with the Greek tunic. Latin resounded alongside Greek, Coptic, and Aramaic. Each new conquered province left its mark on me, and little by little, it became difficult to discern where Rome ended and where the world began. But just as I grew, I also faced profound ruptures. The crises of the 3rd century after Christ shook my economic, political, and military structure. Barbarian invasions, constant usurpations, instability at the frontiers, and fiscal pressure eroded the security and confidence that had sustained me for centuries. The empire split. Constantinople rose as the new capital of the East, while I, Rome, slowly saw my political centrality decline. And then, once again, I transformed. From imperial capital, I became a spiritual seat. The Christian church, which I once harshly persecuted, made me its center, transforming me, not anymore the Rome of legions and pagan gods, but the Rome of Peter and Paul, of popes and martyrs. The temples were converted into churches. The basilicas began to host new cults. Pagan festivities were Christianized, and Jupiter's Colossus gave way to the cross of Christ. It was not a simple transition. The collapse of imperial power in the West, in the 5th century after Christ, brought sack, destruction, and disorder. The barbarians, whom I once feared and fought, crossed my walls, plundered my riches, and reconfigured my institutions. Many then prophesied my death, my extinction, my definitive fall, but no, I did not fall, I changed. I transformed ruin into foundation, loss into legacy, disorder into new order. Upon my ancient stones, upon my worn roads, upon my silent forums, I raised new structures, new powers, new narratives. I continued to be Rome, now medieval, papal, Renaissance, modern. Always the same, always different. My body aged, changed form, lost limbs, gained new scars, but my soul remained intact, that of a city that is never content to merely exist, but seeks to eternalize itself. Thus I go on, crossing centuries, knowing that each transformation is also a reaffirmation of myself. For I am Rome, the city that invented time and paradoxically refused to be conquered by it. I am the city of continuities and ruptures, the one that always changes, so that it can always be said, Rome is eternal.